Good evening. I'm Donna Lance, the Academic Dean here at Moore College of Art and Design. And welcome to Moore College of Art and Design if this is your first time here. And also welcome to our online audience. Thank you for joining us this evening for our first annual Women in Games event. Game Changers is part of our kickoff celebration for our new Interactive and Motion Arts BFA program. We believe that this new major in game arts is being launched at the right time as the game industry is rapidly growing, as is the number of females who play games. However, the number of women working in game arts remains low. We need to change this equation. Our interactive and motion art students will have required paid internships in their junior year and will be career ready to enter the industry upon graduation. To learn what it means to be a game changer, we are delighted to have 5 dynamic women game artists here with us this evening to share their experiences in the industry. Before I introduce this evening's moderator, I wanted to take a moment and thank the many staff across the college who have helped to promote and organize today's events. I also want to thank our new Interactive and Motion Arts faculty, George Beatty, who came on board in August and immediately stepped in to help facilitate the many necessary logistics. And now, introducing our moderator for this evening, Dave Inscore. In fall 2011, we started planning for this new major, and Dave Inscore, who was at the time the art director at Zynga, came to the first focused planning group that we had that fall. And he was gracious enough to return in spring 2012 to work with us in a follow-up group to look at the curriculum that we had developed, to make sure that we were on the mark in terms of having the right kind of courses that would prepare students for careers in the industry. Since that time, he served as a consultant for us as we finished the planning for the new major, and it was through Dave and Dave's many connections, going back to your talk this morning, Jessica, that this amazing group of panelists from Bioware, Backflip Studios, Firaxis, Zenimax Online, and Irrational were identified and assembled. Connections are everything. Dave Inscore is an 18-year game industry veteran. Dave is a 1995 graduate from MICA, where he majored in illustration. During his senior year at MICA, he landed a game artist position with Microprose. In 1997, he moved on to Firaxis, where he distinguished himself as an animator, terrain artist, and interface designer. In 2000, Dave founded Big Huge Games in Baltimore, Maryland, where he was the studio art director and provided artistic leadership for a team of over 100 game developers, including a 26-person art department. Some of the studio's most successful games include Rise of Nations and Rise of Legends, of which the latter received GameSpy's 2006 Special Achievement in Art Direction Award and has been lauded by the press as a playable piece of art. That was from Game Revolution, and from PC Gamer, the best looking RTS I've ever played. In 2010, he made the jump to social game development, where he served as an art director at Zynga East. Please welcome Dave Inscore.
Thank you, Donna, for that wonderful introduction. But that is plenty about me, because I know everyone is here to hear from these very talented women who are movers and shakers in the industry. Legends, I think, is as Helen put it. Yes. So let's just dive right in to getting everyone introduced and up here on stage. I'm going to start with Helen Zhang, artist at Backflip Studios. Next is Taylor Fischer, concept artist from Firaxis. Jessica Hara Campbell, environment artist and level designer, Bioware. Zoe Brookes, graphic designer, Irrational. And Tatiana Malinko, artist, principal figure artist, Zenimax. So we have 5 talented game artists here, and let's dive right in to make the most of our time. So I'm going to start down at the end with Helen, and we can just go right down with a brief description of describe your path into the games industry.
All right, so I want to clarify that I wasn't, what did you say?
It's what did Huffington Post say?
It's industry leader.
Leader, okay, legends.
I like legend.
All right, fine.
I mean, but those aren't my
Leader,
words.
legend, tomato, tomato, yes. Yeah.
All right, I don't think my path is as legendary.
You're just trying to highlight it.
Or sexy. But I did intern at a couple of studios in Baltimore while I was working on wrapping up my stuff at UMBC. UMBC is a state school in Baltimore. It's pretty cool. I studied animation there. And I think it was junior year, maybe the summer entering senior year, where I had an internship at Breakaway Studios. And it was an art internship, and it was the only one they had. And they had a stack of resumes, like 500 people had applied for the same thing. And I think I knew they only had one spot. And I had to kind of fight to death for that, like tooth and nail. Like, I knew the other candidate. He was also in my program. And so I just had to bring my A game and interview really well. And that was my first job, was that summer. I was an art intern at Breakaway Games. And then later I interned at Big Huge Games during my senior year. And actually, Jess was hosting, or Big Huge Games had hosted a couple portfolio reviews. And I went, and Jess had kind of gotten that all together. And so I think I sort of made a good impression at that portfolio review, and later interned at Big Huge Games. And that was like a fantastic opportunity, because later Zynga East reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in an art position. And of course I was like, I just graduated. Yeah, I will take a job, thank you. That would be great. So one of the art directors who was working at Zynga East at the time had formerly worked at Big Huge, where I interned. And I guess it did work, that was good, and he remembered me. And so I kind of got my full-time career started at Zynga. And from there, now I'm at Backflip Studios. So that's kind of not very sexy story.
No, it's a great story.
Yeah.
Taylor?
I'm a Malinko student, and I graduated in 2010, and had an internship my junior year of college at Firaxis Games, working on Civ 5, which was my first title, and then I went to work at Big Huge with Dave and Jess and a lot of other people, and then I got my first full-time job at Zenimax Online, working on Elder Scrolls Online, and then left there to go back to Big Huge, which eventually closed, and then returned to home base at Firaxis, where I had my first internship as a full-time principal concept artist. So yeah, I went all the way up and all the way back down the scale, and no, it's actually my first job was because of a couple of sketches I drew in my sketchbook from my art history class, drawing buildings, and it ended up turning into civilization buildings. It's exactly what they needed. So yeah, that's about it. It's pretty quick.
For me, I'm also a Michael alum. I graduated 2007 as an illustration major. For me, I started my internship because I had asked Dave, because I heard another girl, a classmate of mine, was going to have an unpaid internship at Big Huge Games, and I happened to know several folks, very good friends, who were interning or working there full time, and I kind of psyched myself out before asking. I was like, hey, can I do that thing she's doing, because that sounds awesome? And he said yes, which was good. And for 2 years, I worked at Big Huge as an intern. I worked over winter breaks, over summers. I think I worked like 1 day a week, like all day, and I did half a day. I had another job, and I was a full-time student. And by the time I graduated, I had a full-time job. So I got it.
I graduated in 2009 from the Rhode Island School of Design in the illustration major. Although I decided, as opposed to a lot of my other illustration majors at the time, to add a little bit of graphic design in there, because who knew? Maybe that would work well as freelance. Basically what happened was, after I graduated, I was unemployed and decided just to take it easy, do some freelance, be a florist. I was a florist, then I was a food photographer, and it was like internships that kind of turned into jobs, and it was just kind of chill, and I kind of need that immediately after graduating. And then a random friend who is a very fantastic character artist, Fabiola, she put my name in at 38 Studios as a graphic designer that would be great to join the team. And at the time, I had no interest. I had absolutely no idea how a graphic designer can help, because I didn't actually understand what went into game design. But I went and I interviewed just to see her and see some other college friends. Saw the environment. I saw the idea of a bunch of creative, nerdy people working together, and literally, within the first 5 minutes of the interview, I switched my stance from it could be cool, tell me more about this, to be like, okay, I want to work here, please. Take me in. So I started working at 38, and then sort of left right before all of the big fun times. Before it kind of hit the news. I left for my own reasons, and I went over to Irrational and helped market and Bioshock Infinite.
So my story might be a little bit different because, first of all, I'm a little bit older than everybody else here, and I did not grow up wanting to work in games. I didn't know and I didn't care what games were, and I just wanted to be an artist. I liked art. I started, study art. I'm from a different country. I'm from Russia, so I started to study art at the children's art school. I wanted to be a painter, and that's. At first, I wanted to be a fashion designer, which actually helped me a lot later in my career, because I actually, I know how to make clothes, which comes, it's a really good skill when you actually have to design clothing for the characters and actually model them, which, I know how to make. So I ended up, when I was younger, when my first college path was, I was actually studying architecture, restoration of buildings and structures, and that was back in Russia, in St. Petersburg. I did not quite finish it because at that moment, we decided that we need to move, and but I was already married and I had a kid, and so we just moved to the United States. And while I was staying with my daughter, really small daughter, I'm just not used to staying home, and I was like, oh my god, what can I do to keep busy besides painting? I was trying to work with galleries and some small paintings and whatnot. I'm like, at that point, I actually took over the mail course, and I, for graphic design, because I'm like, I need to get some kind of job. How do I make money with art? And so I actually, and that led me to, my first ever job, like real job, besides like I was working at the tailor shop actually first, which, I could make money making clothes, which is cool, but that's not what I wanted to like really do. I realized actually I did not want to be a fashion designer at all. So my first job was like for a publishing company, just creating advertisements. In them out on the page, colorizing stuff and like whatnot. And after a couple of years of that, I actually finally understood it's not really creative, and this is not really what I want to do. And I'm like, what else is out there? And I actually did a little bit of sort of side detour. I actually went and studied programming for a little while, because I thought, wow, I could do it, and I could get a better paid job. It was all about actually getting a better paid job at that point. But so I was doing it for a while, but still, I'm just artist, and me was just like rebelling, like this is just like boring. But it was actually very useful later on. It was very, very useful. Like knowing a little bit of like C programming. At the very least, I can talk to programmers and they understand right now. And then at that point, actually, it was. Years ago, I stumbled upon this Russian actually website where they were posting like finished renders of finished models, like human models, and I was just like totally mesmerized. I'm like, oh my god, this is what I want to do. It's for me, it was always more about art, just creating art. I really didn't, care much what it was for, but it was actually like the techniques that were being used, and I'm like, oh my god, this is something like I would love to be, able to do. And and actually, I got a copy of 3D Studio Max, and I'm like, yes, I'm gonna learn it, and I created my teapot, and I'm like, I couldn't learn it on my own. That's when I realized I needed to go back to school. So I actually went back to school, and I graduated with BFA in Animation Visual Effects from Academy of Art University in San Francisco, so I'm actually from the West Coast. And most of my career actually happened on the West Coast, and fairly recently transplant here to the East. And so right after school, actually, I was approached by this small animation studio in the area that they were looking at the senior portfolios, and they offered me unpaid internship working on their characters, which I accepted because I wanted to work on characters, and usually straight out of school normally you really don't get to work on full character, but these guys were offering me to do just that. And I accepted the offer, and it actually was, I'm really, really glad that I did, because, it was incredible. I worked for 4 months, I think, as an unpaid intern, and they started paying me. Then I started to work full time for them, and they were making this, it was Exalt Media Group. They were making this sort of sci-fi little, animation, and I actually got to create quite a lot of characters, like from, at first it was just about texturing, somebody was modeling them, and they're like, oh, because they liked my texturing skills, that's where my painting comes in, and eventually, when I started to work on them, I was looking at the shapes, and I'm like, what this, I could improve that, can I like touch this up, and they started to allow me to actually model, and then I became, like a full-time, modeler and / texture artist. And I was also doing a little bit of rigging, where actually my programming skills came in handy, because I was able to easily learn and use math scripting, and so I was doing rigging and facial blend shapes for animation, and and it was really, really great experience. And after those guys, but I was always kept my eyes open, like, what else is out there? And at that point, I actually didn't know anything about game art, like, at all, because I thought that, my future is in, like, film, and, animated film, that's what I wanted to do, But somebody was asking me if I want to work on this volunteer project called Lone Wolf Online, to make, like, a female character for them. again for free, and I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, it's nothing I ever done, but I'm gonna do it, and I had to do a lot of research and kind of teach myself how to make game art, because it's quite different from pre-rendered stuff, the requirements. And that project got shut down, but what it allowed me to do, actually, eventually when an opportunity came along, one of my friends who's an animator, she was interviewing with this small startup company in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And she went for an interview, and then she comes back and she says, you know what, they don't want me, they want you, but they don't know it yet. So she sent me over there, and just this little experience working with games was enough, because it was very small company, so they had hard time attracting like experienced veterans, and they liked my art style, and the fact that I did something for games, they didn't know how little it was. Actually got me hired, because they were all, at that point, it was a startup, and they were all engineers, there were no art people, there was nobody who would actually understand how little I know about games. So they hired me, and it was this open source game engine called Over 3D, which nobody knew anything about. Like when I started, there's no art pipeline, nobody knows how do you take a model from Maya and you put it in the engine. So I had to just essentially just scout forums and ask a lot of questions, and because we would import stuff in game, we think we imported it, but we cannot see it, like where did it go? Stuff was rotating 90 degrees from the point of origin, and it would be somewhere, eventually we figured it out. So
I'm going to dive in. We've got like 7 other questions here. It's fascinating. I love it. Let's go ahead though, but right now you're at Zenimax.
Yes.
But really briefly, how did you make it to Zenimax? From where to where?
Well, after the first game company, I was with another game company, and those were actually social MMOs, which is, but the fact that they even though they're social, they were MMOs, and creating art for MMOs is very, very different than creating for a single player. And there is, yes, and it's, you have to understand the limitations, and just the fact that I worked for 2 of them, and I actually was working on character customization, and this is something that is, there are very few people at that point, at least, that really could do it and do it well. And when the company I was working for, unfortunately, it went out of business because it's in 2010, and I stayed unemployed for about 4 months, and I started to look else. At first I looked locally, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I have to move for a job, and this opportunity came along. I guess I dropped out my resume like at a game developer conference several months ago, and all of a sudden these guys contact me, and I'm like, I want to go to Baltimore, but I don't know, let's go check it out. So I went in for an interview, and it's just like, the project was exactly what I wanted to work on, because I'm a huge fan of fantasy, and all sorts of fantastic creatures, and and what they were actually what I would be working on was very exciting. So I accepted an offer, and I moved across the country, and I have not regretted that decision.
Fantastic. All right. I'm going to make the assumption there are some game career hopefuls in the audience. A quick show of hands, game career hopefuls. All right. So the next thing I'd like to hear from our panelists on are long-term tips for growing a career as game artists. We started with Helen last time. I'm going to take down one to Taylor. Long-term career tips for growing a game artist career.
Never stop making art and keeping your stuff contemporarily contextualized. Looking through forums, just keeping your art up to date, playing a lot of games even though you need sleep at some point. Because trending art is really important, and it's like clothing or like fancy hats, you gotta be able to pick out what people are gonna like. Keeping yourself up to date, that's the biggest thing, keeping yourself up to date with social trends, with gaming trends. Read about games, check out, Polycount, the website, check out, conceptart.org or CG Hub, see what's trending. That's the biggest thing, and don't ever, don't sell yourself short, always try something new. So.
Jess, you had a lot of tips about this in your keynote today, but for those who didn't make the keynote, can you kind of describe the same question, long-term tips for growing a career as a game artist, but not necessarily from the creator side?
So what I found is, you can be extremely talented, and that will get you very far. But for a lot of us, fairly artistically talented. I don't think I was ever the best student. What I found for me, well, not best student, like, there are a lot of people who are better than me, and I will get that, and they're awesome. For me, it's always growing as an artist. But for me, what I found was invaluable were the connections you make throughout your life and your career. You never know where they're going to get you. Like Helen said, I met her at one of our art open houses. She was an excited, energetic student who really wanted to be there, and she came to 3 of the art open houses, and every time I remembered who she was because she made an impression. And it's that kind of thing that's going to get you noticed, rather than, you know, sitting in the corner and being the hopeful. It's step out of your comfort zone, make the connections with people, and you don't know where that's going to get you at all. And do the hard work. When I say hard work, I describe it as not, I have homework and it's due tomorrow, I'm going to pull an all-nighter. Yes, I did hard work and I got the grade, that's awesome. Hard work is really, it's talking about the passion to do what you want to do. What is it that drives you to want to be a game developer? Figure out what that is and figure out how you're going to get there. If you don't know how to do something, figure it out. Talk to people, talk to those connections. There are tons of tutorials, things online that will help you figure out what you need to do that kind of thing. And the last thing is, you know, doing what Helen did. She went out there and, you know, get out of your comfort zone, and all of these things together will help you build a connection with people who will recognize you're a hard worker, who's really excited and passionate about this industry, so that when opportunities come, like for me, I don't know if I ever would have been comfortable in the next 10 years to actually apply to Bioware or feel confident I'm going to get an interview. And they wound up coming to me because of the people I knew, and I had proven myself over the course of 7 years I had been working in the industry, saying, hey, we've heard good things, we'd like to talk to you about a job. And I still think back to the day when I was preparing for my presentation, I was looking at the email, still going like, how the hell did this happen? Like, it's amazing, and there's no reason why you can't do that just by trying to be the best you can be, even outside of just pursuing our career.
So the next topic, it goes back to a brief conversation that Zoe and I had earlier today. Zoe, I'd like to hear you talk about the role of graphic designers in the industry, maybe some things that, maybe we have some graphic designers in the audience. You know, what do you think they need to hear?
Right off the bat, graphic design, I mean, I didn't graduate with that as a major. I graduated as illustration, which is a really fun sort of hybrid between the two, because it's, you know, it's valuing shapes, it's understanding Adobe Illustrator, which very few pure illustrators seem to come into the industry with, and it's a very useful tool. But it was really helpful to me. But the danger of being graphic designers, it seems like, just like, and I would equate this to photography, a lot of people have access to the tools these days, so a lot of people assume that they are a photographer. You know, thanks to your iPhones, thanks to your Android devices, any other person can put a filter on it, and they think that they can turn around and put that in a gallery as a high quality, like, giclée. And you can't do that. That's not really how it works, but arguably it could, but I'm not going to get into that. It's similar exactly with graphic design, which I think, you know, really good graphic designers understand what kerning is and when you can really crunch up text and when you can't, and, you know, why you can't stretch this font that way unless there's something very particular you're going for. But a lot of people, you go on Craigslist or something like that, and this is something that I see with a lot of my friends who are trying to quickly, you know, like maybe get a foot in the door, maybe get a little freelance under their belt. They go on something like Craigslist and they see someone who's like, you're a graphic designer, I'll pay you $100 for a logo, go. That's, it happens a lot, and I'm guilty of looking at that after I graduated, but the thing is, it's just like, don't devalue yourself as a graphic designer, and there's a lot of really new and useful roles in the gaming industry, as well as plenty of other places for a graphic designer. I mean, the marketing department, which is where I primarily am, I can bridge this big gap between Irrational Games is a mostly developer-based studio. We are owned by 2K, which is a publisher. And normally speaking, 2K handles a lot of the marketing. However, Irrational Games has its own marketing department. So because of my role, I'm doing marketing graphics for our studio alongside the graphic designers at the publisher. So there's two jobs right there. and I'm helping make sure that our dev artists feel like we're putting out art and messaging and visuals that actually does represent the amazing game that they're working on, while also still making sure that the publisher is happy, we're saying all the right words, and all the right price points are there, and all the right details are there. And it still looks good, and it's still eye-catching, and it'll still get up on that side of the building in LA at that time. Not in the corporate side, but on the dev side, it's really helpful if you're a UI artist or you want to be doing icons or any of that kind of stuff. There's a ton of graphic design opportunities there. A lot of the illustrators who do, maybe if you play the Bioshock games or anything like that, you know, there's a lot of like cool vintage posters and all that kind of stuff in game, and those are great. Like the typography and everything is just beautiful, and then they destroy it, and it's just so good how destroyed it is. And you know, those are illustrators, but those are also graphic designers. They know, for the most part, a lot of them are illustrators in this case, but they know they have to figure out what's appropriate fonts for that time, because Ken Levine is really good about making sure everything is accurate to the time period. So they're doing all this research for, you know, what are taglines that are appropriate for the 1920s, the 1930s, 1940s, the 1950s, and like looking at all these things and learning from it. So it's always a learning experience, and there's always a good opportunity, and there's always cool opportunities to cross over. Like I really do love working with the dev artists to like say, hey, I love this plaque that you made, but this one letter V has a weird spacing. Can you shift it over just a little bit? I swear, don't kill me. It'll look better in the end than it does, and it's fun. But yeah, just being a designer, understanding some basics of type can really help an illustrator in the long run as well. Guarantee it'll probably do a little bit nicer things to your business card or your blog or your website. So if you have the opportunity to learn just a little bit of Illustrator or any of those other programs, highly recommend it. It's very useful in the long run.
So I'd like to put the next question to Tatiana and Taylor. We'll start with Tatiana. You know, the industry is notorious for stories of, you know, crazy hours, you know, very irresponsible companies working their people into the ground. So, you know, everyone at some point in the games industry career will have to tackle that head on. So talk about, you know, a situation where you tackled that and how you handled it.
Well, I actually was fortunate enough to have very few occurrences of that, because the companies and the people I worked for were really great and understanding people, and I was raising a daughter at that time, you know. But there were several, occurrences where, you know, all of a sudden we were in a crunch mode, and sometimes it was justified, but there were times that there was no particular reason, just because the mentality was just there, that, you know, certain number of individuals that join from a different company, you know, that they bring their own culture, and before you know it, we're crunching, and nobody knows why, because nothing's on fire. But, you know, we were asked to work until 9 p.m. every day, including Saturday and Sunday, and it was going on for about a month. And I mean, I was much younger at that time. I was getting really exhausted and very, very tired. So I probably handled it in a different way than most people, would. I actually started to look for a new job, and luckily for me, I found it, and I left the company.
So you voted with your feet.
Yes, I voted with my feet, which actually in return it ended up, because once, you know, and I understand, especially young artists, they really want, you know, I need to get my foot in the door, and actually what happens is younger guys, they are willing, actually, they're like asking to be taken advantage of, and they're willing, but, you know, better companies are not going to exploit that willingness. But there are some other companies where, you know, but when you see that there's something weird going on, you know, in the culture of the company where people are being exploited, it actually signals that there could be other underlying problems. Because what happened with the company 6 months after I left, the company completely shut down, because, you know, the project was run into the ground by the same people who mismanaged, you know, the scheduling, they mismanaged representation to, you know, they failed to raise another round of financing because they changed way too much about the product, you know. So when you feel that there is something, you know, there are always reasons for, you know, bad things to happen, and there might be other things going on. So if you are, you know, you should be confident enough in your skills, you know, and you should just constantly keep you networking, like the other women here have mentioned. And, you know, so what happened was I just went back to my emails because I would get random emails from like, recruiters, would you like to come and interview for, which I had an email from a recruiter, and I wasn't, because the company was exactly the same type I was working for, and the project didn't seem very interesting, at least, from reading her email. But I went, and I received that email, like, it was 6 months, and I'm like, oh, they definitely filled that position. But, I went back and I replied to the email anyway, and what do you know, they still haven't, because they were extremely picky who they want, and they interviewed like 10 people probably, but they couldn't settle on anybody. They wanted the one, and somehow it turned out to be the one. So especially when you're interviewing for smaller companies, having very open mind and being really energetic, especially if it's a startup, being very energetic and showing them that you're actually willing to learn, that the things that you do not know, you are very passionate about learning. And that's what actually got me that other job, which actually was a really, really great place to work, and I learned a lot, and it was, it was a really, really interesting project, which I didn't realize when reading recruiter's email, because, recruiters only can explain to you so much. So, yeah, I wanted to be.
So, Taylor, we'll put the same question over to you, and something I would add to that, you've seen a number of companies. You're an experienced veteran. How could you, describe how you handled work-life balance, but at the same time, what can you say to industry hopefuls? How can they go out and kind of do the research to get some intel on the company?
Definitely, talk to your connections. Speak to them about the company life, what it's like, what kind of hobbies your company has, because a lot of times there are side programs like softball or soccer, or we had a small group that did horseback riding, fox hunting for a while. So, really talk to the people who work there when you go in for your interview. Really dig deep for what the culture is like. Because I've personally had the experience of working at a place that wasn't a good fit for me, and ended very badly, and then I actually ended up having a stress-induced low blood pressure aneurysm at my desk at work because of stress, and that ended up kind of making me realize that I can't not sleep and work all the time because I'm very driven, and that I need to give myself this space. So finding a culture is extremely important because it's a very driven group of people. So really dig into those people's work lives as well as their passions, and who you can befriend and who you can hang out with. Because that's really what it's gonna be. You're gonna make sure that you're that you're healthy outside of work as well as within work.
So the next thing I'd like for us to dive into is also kind of an industry issue, which is the issue of instability. I'm going to put this to Jess and Helen. So, the industry is notorious for instability. Companies can be around for a long time, or then companies can just all of a sudden go under and no one knows why. It's that way. How have you guys weathered industry changes? And during those times of transition, did you discover unexpected opportunities? And we'll start down with Helen.
Great. So into my career in games, I don't know exactly when I started. I guess it was 2008 or 2009 when I got my first internship. So 5-6 years? I don't know. But I've been through several companies. My first internship was with Breakaway Games, and they actually had a huge financial backer pull out while I was in my internship. So that was a great way to start my career, was watching this mass layoff happen. Just sitting in the room and being like, ooh, these guys all have families and stuff, and I'm just an intern, and this is the first experience. Then I later went on to Big Huge Games, which many of you know is now closed. That was also hard, so it's kind of ooh, I don't know if I want to get into this. And then Zynga picked me up, and that was interesting because I started in Brian Reynolds' basement. I started in some guy's basement. So I'm sitting here yeah, this is my career. Zynga actually was a great success for me, at least momentarily, because they blew up and they had a great time. We moved to a real office and that was cool.
Blew up in a good way.
Blew up in a good way. I mean, there's money, it was great, there were parties, that was all fantastic. Just really happy I had that experience. And then it's like a headquarters is all, we're having too much fun. No, they made a decision to close their branch. So once again, I saw another round of layoffs, and at the same time, Epic Games had decided to close Impossible. I mean, these were like literally weeks apart, so we were all like, and we're all in Maryland, so we're like, oh no, this is sad. But from all of that, I started working, or it was a great opportunity to maintain my portfolio between these companies. It's like a really good reminder, like, at any time, we just pull the carpet from under you. So keep your portfolio up to date. That would be a great thing to suggest and something I should be doing myself, but you know, do as I say, not as I do. So get back to the original question. So in terms of weathering those changes, I think it's important to have an open mind about what you're going to do next. So initially, I thought I was going to be a AAA artist, like, I don't know, concept or environment, or maybe I'll just paint textures all day, and that would be life. That was my dream. And then I got a job that was actually kind of cool. It was social, mobile. I was doing a lot of Flash animation, which I actually kind of lied about knowing how to do for the interview. I kind of didn't know how to do it, but I figured it out. And it, you know, it's kind of important to lie a little bit. So in order to continue to be employed, you do need to learn how to lie just a little bit, but you also need the skill set to back those lies up, right? Like you put on the face, but then you deliver. And delivering is really important. So,
lie and learn quickly.
Lie and learn quickly. That's the two L's. Keep your portfolio updated. So for me, like I kind of got the sense that Zynga East was sort of heading in a weird direction, and I started putting my feelers out. I quickly cobbled together a portfolio that was just filled with lies. Good lies. And I tricked these people into hiring me. And then I showed up, they're in Boulder, Colorado, so I flew like 1,400 or 1,700 miles. Doesn't matter. I flew like really far away. Actually, I drove. No, I drove. I actually drove. And I started on April 1st. No lie. Nobody lied. So I started on April 1st. I brought it. Like, I didn't think that my career was going into mobile, but it did, and it was a great change, and I embraced it, and now instead of doing all the rocks on a console title, like modeling and texturing all these rocks, I have like a much bigger role as an artist. It's a general artist role. So I'm doing a lot of concept art, a lot of UI stuff, and even a little bit of 3D, and I was doing that at Zynga too. So at the end of the day, I actually picked up a lot of cool marketable skills that I think will let me survive beyond just the games industry, and beyond just this company, because I've learned how to lie, and I've learned how to back up these lies with real marketable skills.
I'm going to jump in and say, I see Helen's portfolio. It is not full of lies. It's wonderful, and there's a reason why Backflip snatched her up as soon as she put the feelers out. So.
But it's important that people know. Well, sometimes you have to lie to yourself and just like pump yourself up. Like, yeah, I can go to this event, talk to people, pretend like I'm an industry leader. They'll believe me. So that's, yeah, that'd be turned off.
So let's move on to Jess. Jess, let's talk about your lies.
I'll be like lying, maybe it's head back.
Adapt. Tomato, tomato. Why is it adapt? Go ahead.
So I've seen many different forms of how volatile this industry is. When I was just interning at Big Huge, we had shipped, I think, Rise of Nations and Rise of Legends with Microsoft as our publisher. And as we were working on the sequel to Rise of Legends, Microsoft decided, yep, we're not going to be your publisher anymore. And all of a sudden, we were an independent company, and we didn't have someone to fund us to make the next game. So it was, maybe because I was an intern at the time, to me it was a quiet panic. Okay, we need to put something together real fast. And for me, that meant, hey Jess, try all these different things. I was doing all sorts of different art styles. Earlier I showed I got stuck making a zombie, eat zombies, and I made a zombie. We were doing more stuff like Ron, where it was more military vehicles, helicopters, really realistic cows. Eventually we came up with a Wii game, which is the total opposite end of that. Eventually at that point, THQ came in. Rest in peace, THQ, more of that. The THQ came in and they were going to be our publisher, and then a little bit later they actually bought Big Huge outright, which was great for me because that's why I was hired, because now we had money and a job and a team. So we went through that phase, and then THQ had kind of overreached a little bit, and eventually they shut down the Wii project, which is great sadness. And then several months later, they decided they were going to sell us, and we had about 2 months to find a new publisher, or we weren't going to be a company anymore. That's kind of when we took what was going to become Reckoning. In its first iteration, we basically in 2 months made a full vertical slice, which you usually plan for about 6 months, and you develop for it in about 6 months. And we put this thing together in 2 months. And it was all hands on deck. They didn't say, hey, don't look for other jobs. If you want to look for other jobs, go ahead. We're not going to hold you back. But instead, because we were the team, we were this family, and we love the company so much, everybody came to work, even though, they probably should have been putting their portfolios together to find a new job, because this might not work. There was no guarantee. But instead, we figured out how to make this prototype. We were able to pitch it, and 38 stepped in. 38 Studios took us on as a sister studio. Eventually, we got publishing with EA. So that was great. We had jobs, we were secure, we were going to make this game, and we got through that. And then after Reckoning was published, EA said, you know what, you guys are a little too close to Dragon Age. Kind of separate that, because they don't want to compete against each other. So in the meantime, we're looking for a new publisher when the madness that was the downfall of 38, oh yes, which affected so many of us, that was a different story. That was, hey, we're pulling the plug, and we owe you money. And now it's like, oh, well, we're definitely not getting paid now. What can we possibly do to keep the band together, pretty much? And for about 3 weeks, we really held out that we were going to be able to get the next demo together, show publishers what we were doing, and hopefully have a chance at surviving. But unfortunately, this time nothing came through. And these people I went to college with some of my best friends, my husband, we all suddenly didn't have jobs. And it was really interesting. So one, it's really awesome to work with your significant other, but then you both don't have jobs. So we're also kind of dumb, because then Epic came along and said, hey, we want to take this team that exists, you work well together, you all live here, let's start a subsidiary studio. So eventually I was working for Epic with Impossible Studios, and my husband and I got jobs there, along with some of my best friends, which ultimately is why I said no to Bioware. We thought, this is great, we have a house, we have our friends, nothing has to change, we're going to keep going on with life. 7 months later, Impossible closed. Still don't know why. And they're like, shit, we did it again. But then, for whatever reason, every time it's like always, trying to adapt and change, learn things you need to do to survive. Bioware was like, hey, we're still interested, or are you still interested, and we like the work that you've done. Hey, do you want to come work on Mass Effect? Yes, please. So, okay, so we still don't learn because my husband and I still work together. And he's my boss. So we're really hoping this time it's going to work out. But I mean, that's it. The industry changes and it sucks. I mean, you know, we all work close together. I live in Montreal now. I don't even live in America. Some of my best friends live in California now. We've dispersed across the country. But the downside of, or the upside of, when a company goes under, that means all those people I've worked with for 2, 3, 5, 7 years, they're all over the country now. So if anything ever happens again, I know a whole bunch of people I can talk to who know what I can do. And now I have job opportunities out there for me, and I can help other people when, you know, they're in a bad situation. So it really is just connections and getting out there and making the best out of the worst case.
So we've certainly I've geared some of the questions to try to give you a real insight into the industry, the good, the bad, and the in-between. But I want to make sure we're ending on a positive note, and I'm just going to ask a show of hands. Do you love being a game artist in the industry? Show of hands is the last question. There you go. Okay. Just to make sure this section we ended on a positive note. So yes. We have a few minutes. We're going to open it up to audience questions. There are a couple of mics around, so if you raise your hand, I will call on you and then wait for the mic to come down to you. But so we'll open that up now, right there.
Hi. So I apologize if I'm wrong on this, but it sounds like you're mostly working or have worked on kind of larger scale games at larger companies. I'm curious if you're interested either as just like a lover of games or in working on smaller, more personal games like Gone Home by the Fulbright Company, or even smaller scale stuff like DIY games like by Anthropy and Maracopus, stuff like that.
Okay, Taylor, I know you do some stuff on the side. Do you want to take that question?
I mean, yeah, I'm assuming as like a personal interest, like just as a, like what's like a preference for working on stuff. I still do game jams a lot. There's actually, and this is like a big thing, if people don't know about game jams, it's usually sponsored by schools or a small company. Rosetta Stone actually hosts like global game jams where you can win prizes. But a lot of time you have 48 hours to put together like a tiny game that's either like educational or helpful. And those kinds of stuff are tons of fun. And I'm a huge mobile player, and like I take the time to make my own projects all the time. I do my own like D&D modules and stuff like that. So I don't think personally the passion for games is limited to scale in any way or format. It's games as a whole, like as a culture, I think is where like the passion is. So.
Let's see, we'll go right here.
I was just wondering if any of you have like programming experience, and if you don't, has that ever been a problem for you, or does that affect your jobs in any way?
I'll open it up. Anyone want to talk about programming?
Do you mind? You can totally go.
So I don't think programming experience is exactly necessary for an artist, but at least having an understanding so you can have a dialogue with programmers is extremely useful. If you're looking at being a tech artist especially, they tend to also have a programming background, but even for being an environmental artist, so I can talk to the programmer and understand, especially with reckoning, we have to get that game working on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, which are all very, very different, and you need to understand, why do I have to cut this left half of this space? I don't understand. Oh, I have to pull out this because of memory and this and that. So it's understanding working with them is very useful. I would say more often for artists, if you're going to be doing anything, it's probably more scripting than true coding. But at the same time, it doesn't hurt to learn. I think Tatiana, you said you have a bit of a programming background.
Yeah, for me, I found it extremely useful, even though, I'm all about art and I love doing art, but not, and programming isn't really as difficult as people think. It's just, I don't think it is. It's not really, there is this kind of culture exists where like people think that artists like simply think in, you know, with a different part of brain. That's not true. You know, artists are just as capable of doing at least a little bit of you know, scripting, because there might be instances like, well, first of all, you actually have to be able to talk to programmers. Where in my past jobs, I actually worked really closely with engineers, software engineers, and it was extremely useful, you know, for us to even find common language and to explain, you know, what it is that I want, you know, the model to do in game, because they might even use different terminology. And in addition to that, you know, when I was sort of like on my first project, sort of learning, there were no tools, there were no exporter tools. I actually had to do a little bit of scripting, even as to, you know, create a material for a game. It wasn't visual at all, and that's where my skills, at least it was very simple actually, but you know, just to edit an XML file, you know, but you have to really understand what are you doing in there, you know, and especially for someone who just starts in the industry, you know, you are not going to be a senior character artist to start with, you know, you're probably going to be modeling rocks and, you know, little bouncing balls and, you know, texturing stuff and rigging, you know, once I had to rig a gigantic ball that was deflating. You know, so actually having something like, because like, what will distinguish you from, you know, hundreds of other alumni that want to do exactly, that want to do your job? If you have at least one extra skill, hopefully several other extra skills, you know, it will actually be, you know, to your advantage, because, you know, when an employer looks at two exactly like similar, you know, skill-wise portfolios, but then they read that some, you know, one of the candidates actually have some kind of, you know, scripting ability and some kind of programming background, they're probably going to go with that candidate, because it's simply because, you know, they know that this person could actually do more down the line, especially the smaller students.
I think one of the things you touched on there is, as a young artist coming into the industry, being willing and excited to do the unexciting work is going to do the most to gain you the respect of the veterans than anything. I've seen that time and again. If you come into it with an expectation that, you know, you're lucky to have me, your career is going to be stalled. Right. We have time for one more question. I saw a hand up over here, so I want to make sure. Was somebody over there with a hand up? There we go.
I was wondering, since you're like modeling rocks, or like, I don't know, you're talking a lot throughout the day about how you get a lot of instructions about what exactly it is you need to do. So I'm wondering if there's any room for you as artists to have your personal style or vision or anything.
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on what studio you're at. Typically, if you're coming in as an entry-level artist, you don't get as much say. You're able to sort of infuse your style into stuff, but it's kind of important to match the style, at least like when you're starting out. You want to stay humble. You don't put any like grand ideas into things that you think are amazing, but actually aren't. Just do it gently. Just start, you know, gently pushing your style. Eventually, if you can get into a company that's small enough, if you can get in on sort of the ground floor of that company, you have way more wiggle room to interject your personal style. And that's something like I feel really lucky about. I ended up, so the Zynga thing, I was the second artist hired behind one of the art directors. And that was, I felt like I had a lot of ownership and stuff. And that was important to me. And now at Backflip, I feel like I'm given a long leash to just kind of run. And that's something you get after just doing your time, putting your head down, just chilling, following instructions.
This has been great. I want to personally thank Tatiana, Zoe, Jessica, Taylor, and Helen. I'm going to turn it over to Donna now to say the final words.
How about a wrap it up? For the panel discussion. Please join us. We have a reception right outside in the Whitehead Gallery, and all of our panelists will be there, and please feel free to mingle and ask you questions there. Thank you very much for coming.
Live. But now we have a